Brandon Pierce believed he was protecting the prestige of America's most exclusive corporate summit that night. But before the chandeliers dimmed and the cameras stopped rolling, the arrogant host would realize the quiet woman he humiliated near the ballroom entrance owned every spotlight above his head. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The glass walls of the Monarch Grand Hotel reflected the glowing skyline of downtown Chicago as black SUVs lined the curb outside the annual Titan Global Leadership Summit, one of the most powerful corporate gatherings in the country. Billionaires, investors, media executives, and Fortune 500 CEOs moved through the marble lobby beneath crystal chandeliers, while photographers captured every polished smile and designer suit that entered the building. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume, fresh flowers, and aged whiskey from the executive lounge upstairs. At the center of it all stood Brandon Pierce, the summit's polished young host, greeting elite guests with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled the room. His tuxedo was perfectly tailored, his smile rehearsed, his voice smooth enough to charm cameras and investors alike. Brandon loved appearances because appearances had built his career. To him, prestige was everything. Then the revolving doors slowly turned again. A woman stepped inside carrying nothing more than a simple leather handbag and a dark wool coat folded over one arm. Evelyn Hartwell did not look like the other guests arriving that evening. No security escort followed her. No assistant rushed beside her with tablets and schedules. Her silver earrings were modest, her cream-colored blouse unbranded, and her heels made soft echoes against the marble floor as she calmly observed the crowded lobby with steady blue eyes. Several guests barely glanced at her before returning to their conversations, assuming she was hotel staff or perhaps someone's assistant who had wandered too far into the VIP entrance. But Brandon noticed her immediately. His expression changed almost instantly. Not dramatically, just enough. A faint tightening near his jaw, a subtle narrowing of the eyes. The kind of reaction wealthy people perfected when they silently decided someone did not belong near them. Evelyn approached the registration counter with quiet confidence and offered her name to the young woman behind the desk. Before the receptionist could answer, Brandon stepped forward smoothly, placing one hand against the marble counter. "Ma'am," he said politely, though the smile on his face never reached his eyes, "the executive ballroom is reserved for invited leadership members only." The nearby conversation softened. A few guests glanced over their champagne glasses. Evelyn looked at him calmly. "I'm aware," she replied softly. Brandon's smile sharpened slightly. "Then there must be some confusion with your invitation." The room did not fully stop moving, but something shifted. Naomi Keller, one of the event coordinators standing nearby with a digital tablet pressed against her chest, noticed something strange immediately. Most people became embarrassed when challenged publicly in a room like this. Most people explained themselves, apologized, left quietly. But Evelyn Hartwell simply stood there without anger, without panic, without even the slightest trace of insecurity. Her eyes remained steady on Brandon as though she already knew something he didn't. Then Brandon glanced toward security near the elevator and said words that would soon destroy the rest of his evening. "Please make sure she doesn't enter the ballroom until we verify who she really is." Evelyn Hartwell did not move when the security guards approached her near the ballroom entrance, and somehow that calmness made the situation even more uncomfortable. The music from the grand piano continued softly across the marble lobby while executives in tailored suits slowed their conversations just enough to watch what would happen next. Brandon Pierce straightened the cuff of his tuxedo with practiced confidence, clearly enjoying the attention gathering around him. To the people standing nearby, it looked like another ordinary moment in a luxury event, a host quietly removing someone who did not belong. But Naomi Keller felt a knot forming in her stomach as she watched Evelyn's expression remain completely steady beneath the golden chandelier lights. "There is no need for security," Evelyn said politely, her voice low and controlled. "My name should already be on the executive access list." Brandon gave a soft laugh that sounded more insulting because he tried to disguise it as professionalism. "Ma'am," Everyone claims that once they get here. A few nearby guests exchanged amused looks. One man holding a whiskey glass smirked and whispered something to the woman beside him, causing her to hide a smile behind her hand. The humiliation was subtle, polished, corporate, exactly the kind that left no visible bruise while still cutting deeply enough for everyone in the room to feel it. Evelyn slowly reached into her handbag and removed a slim black invitation card embossed with silver lettering. Naomi immediately noticed the quality of it. It was not one of the standard guest passes printed for attendees. This card looked different. Older. Custom-made. But Brandon barely glanced at it before handing it back. "These credentials do not authorize ballroom seating," he said smoothly. "Especially not front-row executive access." Evelyn looked directly at him. "I never asked for special treatment." "Then perhaps there has been a misunderstanding about the type of event this is," Brandon replied. His voice remained calm, but there was now something sharper beneath it. Titan Summit is a private gathering for industry leadership. The room grew quieter. Several guests had fully turned toward them now, pretending not to stare while openly listening to every word. Naomi could feel the tension spreading across the lobby like cold air. She stepped closer to the registration desk and quickly checked the digital attendee system again. Her fingers froze over the screen. Evelyn Hartwell's name was definitely there, but before she could examine the profile details, Brandon spoke again. "Naomi, there is no need to hold up the line." She hesitated. "Actually, sir, I think there might be something unusual about her registration." Brandon lowered his voice slightly, though not enough to hide his irritation. "Unusual does not mean authorized." Evelyn remained perfectly still while the crowd quietly judged her appearance. Her blouse had no visible designer logo. Her handbag was elegant but understated. In a room overflowing with luxury watches and diamond jewelry, she looked almost invisible. And Brandon had built his entire worldview around visible status. He believed wealth needed to announce itself loudly. The idea that real power could walk quietly into a room had never crossed his mind. A famous investor named Victor Lang stepped off the elevator nearby, briefly glancing toward the commotion. For just a second, his eyes landed on Evelyn. His expression changed almost imperceptibly before he continued walking without a word. Naomi noticed it immediately. Brandon did not. "I think it would be best if you waited in the public networking lounge downstairs," Brandon said firmly. "The executive ballroom upstairs is reserved for keynote participants, sponsors, and ownership affiliates." Evelyn's eyes finally narrowed slightly for the first time that evening. Not in anger, in disbelief. Then Brandon smiled politely toward the security guards beside her and delivered the sentence that caused several nearby conversations to stop completely. "Before we proceed any further," he said, loud enough for surrounding guests to hear, "I am going to need proof that you actually belong at this summit." The marble lobby seemed to grow colder after Brandon Pierce demanded proof that Evelyn Hartwell belonged at the summit, and the silence spreading through the crowd carried the unmistakable tension of wealthy people waiting for someone to fail publicly. Dozens of eyes followed Evelyn now. Executives paused beside towering flower arrangements. Investors near the champagne bar lowered their voices. Even the hotel staff standing near the elevators exchanged uncertain glances as the elegant woman in the cream blouse became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Yet Evelyn herself remained composed beneath the chandelier light, almost untouched by the pressure surrounding her. She looked at Brandon for several seconds before calmly opening her handbag again. "I was invited personally," she said quietly. "There should not be any issue with my access." Brandon folded his hands in front of him with polished patience, but irritation had already started creeping beneath his carefully controlled expression. "Then perhaps you can provide the name of the executive who invited you." Evelyn's gaze did not move. The invitation came directly from the ownership office. A few nearby guests reacted immediately. One woman in a silver evening dress raised her eyebrows in disbelief, while a man beside her let out a quiet laugh into his whiskey glass. Ownership office. In a summit this exclusive, people rarely used words like that unless they were trying too hard to sound important. Brandon smiled again, this time with open skepticism. "That is a very impressive claim." Naomi Keller looked down at the registration tablet once more, trying to ignore the growing discomfort in her chest. Evelyn's profile remained locked behind executive clearance settings Naomi did not have permission to access. That alone was unusual. Almost nobody on the attendee list had restricted files. She glanced back toward Evelyn and noticed something else. The black invitation card still rested in the woman's hand, and embossed near the corner was a small silver crest Naomi recognized instantly. It was the original founding insignia of Hartwell Capital Group, a symbol retired from public branding nearly 15 years earlier. Naomi had only seen it once during internal sponsor briefings for the summit. Her pulse quickened slightly. Before she could say anything, Brandon took another step forward. "Ma'am, this summit includes some of the most powerful executives in the country," he said smoothly. "You cannot simply walk into restricted areas and expect access because you mention ownership." Evelyn's voice remained calm. "I'm not expecting anything. I simply arrived where I was told to be." The surrounding crowd began leaning into the moment now, drawn toward the growing humiliation with the same fascination people always had when prestige and embarrassment collided in public. Phones subtly lowered. Conversations faded. The piano music upstairs suddenly felt distant beneath the weight of the tension filling the lobby. Then Victor Lang reappeared near the ballroom staircase. The billionaire investor slowed when he noticed Evelyn again. For a split second, genuine surprise crossed his face. Not confusion, recognition. He looked as though he was about to approach her, but Brandon intercepted the moment before it could happen. "Security," Brandon said loudly enough for nearby attendees to hear. "Please escort Ms. Hartwell to the downstairs networking lounge until her credentials are verified." Naomi's stomach tightened immediately. The downstairs lounge was where rejected guests, assistants, and overflow attendees were quietly redirected away from executive areas. Everyone in the room understood exactly what the move meant. It was not about verification anymore. It was about public removal. One of the security guards stepped closer, clearly uncomfortable. Evelyn finally turned her eyes toward him instead of Brandon. "I do not wish to create a disruption," she said softly, "but I suggest someone contacts the summit board before this situation becomes embarrassing for everyone involved." Brandon almost laughed. Embarrassing for whom? The room went nearly silent after that question. Naomi looked toward Victor Lang again and noticed the billionaire had stopped walking completely now, staring directly at Evelyn with growing concern. Then Brandon lifted his hand toward the ballroom entrance and made the decision that would change the atmosphere of the entire summit within minutes. "Actually," he announced with a cold smile, "before anyone goes upstairs tonight, we are going to verify her identity publicly right here in the lobby." The tension inside the Monarch Grand Hotel settled into something heavy and uncomfortable after Brandon Pierce announced that Evelyn Hartwell's identity would be verified publicly in front of the entire lobby. The grand piano upstairs continued playing softly, but now every elegant note seemed distant beneath the growing humiliation unfolding under the chandelier lights. Guests standing near the ballroom entrance openly watched without pretending anymore. Investors paused halfway through conversations. Waiters carrying silver trays slowed their steps. Even the photographers near the media wall subtly turned their cameras toward the scene developing near the registration desk. Brandon stood confidently at the center of it all, fully convinced he was protecting the summit's reputation from embarrassment. He did not realize he was becoming the embarrassment himself. "This will only take a moment," Brandon said smoothly while extending his hand toward Evelyn. "If you can provide proper identification and proof of executive affiliation, we can clear this misunderstanding immediately." Evelyn looked at him quietly for several seconds. Her expression never hardened, never cracked. The remarkable thing about her calmness was how deeply it unsettled the people around her. She did not look frightened. She did not look defensive. She looked disappointed. Naomi Keller could feel it now with painful clarity. Something about this situation was deeply wrong. She glanced once more at the restricted registration profile glowing on her tablet screen. The file had just updated automatically with a red administrative lock she had never seen before. Her pulse quickened. "Brandon," Naomi whispered carefully, trying not to attract attention, "maybe we should contact executive coordination before continuing this." Brandon barely looked at her. "Executive coordination hired me to prevent situations exactly like this." A few people nearby nodded in quiet approval. In rooms built on status and exclusivity, confidence often sounded like authority. Evelyn slowly reached into her handbag and removed a slim leather card holder. The lobby grew even quieter as she carefully opened it and placed a single black business card on the marble registration counter. Naomi immediately stared at the silver crest embossed in the corner. The old Hartwell Capital insignia again. But this time there was also a name beneath it. Evelyn Hartwell. No title, no contact information, just the name. Brandon picked up the card between two fingers and gave a faint amused smile. Very minimalist, he said, handing it back without concern. Unfortunately, anyone can print a business card. A few people laughed softly nearby. The sound echoed far louder than it should have in the marble lobby. For the first time that evening, a faint sadness crossed Naomi's face. She could see the injustice unfolding clearly now, but fear kept her silent. Brandon had influence over the summit staff, media access, future contracts. Speaking against him publicly could damage her career instantly. Meanwhile, Evelyn simply placed the card back into her holder with careful composure. No anger, no argument. Then she looked directly at Brandon and spoke in a voice so calm that several people unconsciously stopped moving just to hear her clearly. The easiest way to reveal character, she said softly, is to give someone a little authority and watch how they treat people they believe cannot defend themselves. The room fell completely silent after that. Even Brandon seemed briefly caught off guard by the quiet weight behind her words. But arrogance has a dangerous habit of mistaking calmness for weakness. His expression quickly hardened again. I believe this conversation has gone far enough, he said firmly. This summit is a private executive function, and at this point, you are delaying registered guests from entering the ballroom. Two security guards shifted uncomfortably beside Evelyn, clearly reluctant to escalate the situation further. Brandon noticed their hesitation and straightened his posture. Escort Ms. Hartwell downstairs, he ordered coldly. Remove her access badge and make sure she leaves the executive level immediately. A hush fell across the lobby. No one spoke. No one intervened. The crystal chandeliers reflected softly against the polished marble floor as Evelyn slowly lifted her coat over one arm and nodded once without resistance. Then, with dozens of wealthy strangers silently watching her walk toward the elevators like someone being erased from a world she supposedly did not belong in, Evelyn Hartwell quietly said words that would haunt Brandon Pierce before the night was over. Very well, she said gently. Let us see who truly belongs here. Evelyn Hartwell stepped into the private elevator without protest, while the heavy silence of the lobby followed her like a shadow. The security guards beside her avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with what had just happened in front of hundreds of guests. As the elevator doors closed, the bright reflections of crystal chandeliers disappeared behind polished steel walls, leaving only the quiet hum of the descending floor numbers between them. Evelyn stood calmly with one hand resting over her folded coat, while the city lights shimmered faintly through the glass panels overlooking downtown Chicago. Not once had she raised her voice upstairs. Not once had she tried to defend her status by force. That quiet dignity unsettled people far more than anger ever could. When the elevator reached the lower networking level, one of the guards finally cleared his throat awkwardly. His name tag read Tyler Boone. Ma'am, he said carefully, for what it is worth, I do not think you deserve that. Evelyn turned toward him with the same calm expression she had carried all evening. Thank you, she replied softly. You were only doing your job. Tyler looked genuinely ashamed. Still, there are better ways people could have handled it. Evelyn gave a faint smile, though sadness touched her eyes for the first time that night. Power often reveals people before pressure ever does. The downstairs lounge was quieter than the executive ballroom above. A few assistants sat near charging stations while event overflow guests spoke quietly beneath dim amber lighting. Large television screens streamed highlights from previous Titan summits, celebrating billion-dollar mergers and leadership speeches from famous executives. Evelyn slowly walked toward the windows overlooking the Chicago River and stood there silently for several moments. Tyler remained nearby, uncertain whether to leave or stay. Then he noticed her lightly touching the silver watch around her wrist. It was old and elegant, clearly worn for many years. My father gave me this watch before the very first Titan summit, Evelyn said quietly, still looking out toward the city lights. Tyler blinked in surprise. She had not even turned around, yet somehow she knew he was listening. Back then, she continued softly, the event was held inside a hotel ballroom half this size. Folding chairs, cheap coffee, barely 50 attendees. Tyler frowned slightly. You attended the first summit? Evelyn nodded faintly. My father believed American businesses should be built on character before image. He spent his entire life trying to create rooms where people with ideas could be respected before they became successful. Her voice remained steady, but something deeply personal lived beneath every word now. Tonight would have been his 75th birthday. Tyler lowered his eyes immediately. The air in the lounge suddenly felt heavier. Evelyn smiled gently, almost to herself. I promised him years ago that no matter how large these events became, I would continue attending quietly at least once every year. No press, no announcements, just to remember where it started. Tyler stared at her in stunned silence. Pieces were beginning to connect in his mind now, though he still could not fully understand the scale of what was unfolding upstairs. Before he could speak again, Naomi Keller suddenly appeared near the lounge entrance, breathing slightly faster than before. She looked nervous, conflicted, almost frightened. Her eyes immediately found Evelyn. Ms. Hartwell, she said softly, I wanted to apologize for earlier. Evelyn turned toward her kindly. You have nothing to apologize for. Naomi hesitated. I should have said something sooner. Evelyn's expression remained warm. Doing the right thing becomes difficult when fear is involved. That does not make you a bad person. Naomi looked visibly emotional after hearing that. Upstairs, faint applause echoed through the ceiling as another keynote session began in the executive ballroom. But before anyone could say another word, a deep mechanical sound suddenly rolled through the hotel entrance above them. Then came another. Engines. Multiple engines. Heavy luxury vehicles arriving one after another outside the hotel. Tyler slowly turned toward the staircase leading back upstairs as the entire atmosphere inside the building shifted almost instantly. The atmosphere inside the Monarch Grand Hotel changed before anyone upstairs even understood why. One by one, conversations near the ballroom entrance began fading as guests noticed the arrival of 3 black luxury sedans pulling silently beneath the glowing hotel canopy outside. Valet attendants immediately straightened their posture. Hotel management hurried toward the entrance with visible urgency. Even the security staff near the elevators exchanged nervous looks as men and women in dark tailored coats stepped through the revolving doors carrying slim leather folders embossed with the silver Hartwell insignia. Upstairs inside the executive ballroom, Brandon Pierce was midway through introducing the evening keynote schedule when he noticed movement spreading across the back of the room. Important guests were no longer paying attention to him. Their eyes had shifted toward the ballroom entrance instead. Brandon forced a confident smile and continued speaking into the microphone, but uncertainty had already begun creeping beneath his polished composure. Then Victor Lang suddenly stood from his front row seat without warning. Several executives turned immediately. Victor Lang almost never interrupted public events. The billionaire investor calmly buttoned his suit jacket and walked straight past Brandon toward the ballroom doors. Brandon lowered the microphone slightly, confused. Victor, he asked with a nervous laugh. Everything all right? Victor barely looked at him. Apparently not. The room grew noticeably quieter after that. Near the ballroom entrance, Naomi Keller had just stepped out of the elevator with Tyler Boone beside her. Both looked tense. Behind them walked 2 senior legal advisors from Hartwell Capital Group, followed by an older woman with silver hair and commanding posture recognized instantly by nearly every executive in the room. Diane Mercer, chairwoman of the Titan Summit Board. The moment Brandon saw her, the color drained slightly from his face. Diane Mercer never attended ballroom receptions personally unless something serious had happened. Her eyes moved through the room with cold precision before stopping directly on Brandon. Where is Ms. Hartwell? She asked calmly. The silence that followed felt immediate and unnatural. Brandon forced another smile, though this one looked fragile. There seems to have been some confusion regarding a guest credential issue. Diane Mercer stared at him without expression. Guest? She repeated quietly. Brandon suddenly became aware that people throughout the ballroom were now openly watching him. Investors leaned forward in their seats. Executive staff froze near the walls. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Naomi lowered her eyes slightly, unable to watch what was happening next. Diane Mercer took one slow step closer. Do you have any idea who you escorted out of this ballroom tonight? Brandon's throat tightened. For the first time all evening, genuine uncertainty entered his face. I was informed there was no verified executive authorization attached to her registration. Victor Lang finally spoke from nearby, his voice calm but heavy with disbelief. Brandon, you removed Evelyn Hartwell from her own summit. The room went completely silent. Not polite silence. Not social silence. Total silence. Brandon blinked once as though his mind refused to process the sentence he had just heard. Around him, several executives exchanged stunned looks while others slowly turned toward one another in shock. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a champagne glass nearly slipped from someone's hand. Diane Mercer's voice remained steady. Hartwell Capital Group owns the parent organization that funds this summit, the conference network attached to it, and this hotel partnership itself. Brandon's face lost all remaining confidence. No, he whispered instinctively, almost to himself. But the terrifying part was that everyone around him already knew it was true. Naomi watched Brandon's entire posture collapse inch by inch beneath the weight of realization. All evening he had judged Evelyn by her quiet clothes, her calm voice, her refusal to announce power like everyone else in the room. And now the room itself seemed ashamed for having followed his lead. Then the ballroom doors slowly opened again. Evelyn Hartwell stepped inside wearing the same cream-colored blouse and carrying the same folded coat over one arm. No dramatic entrance. No security escort. No performance. Yet the moment she entered, nearly every person in the ballroom instinctively stood up. The soft echoes of chairs sliding across marble floors filled the room as Brandon stared at her in complete disbelief. Evelyn looked directly at him with calm, unreadable eyes. Then she spoke the sentence that made the entire ballroom stop breathing for a moment. Mr. Pierce, she said quietly, I believe you asked for proof that I belonged here. The silence inside the executive ballroom felt almost sacred after Evelyn Hartwell calmly reminded Brandon Pierce that he had demanded proof she belonged there. Hundreds of powerful people stood frozen beneath the crystal chandeliers while the city lights of Chicago shimmered through the towering glass windows behind them. Only minutes earlier, many of those same executives had watched her being escorted away without question. Now no one seemed willing to breathe too loudly. Brandon stared at Evelyn as if the room itself had suddenly shifted beneath his feet. His carefully rehearsed confidence had vanished completely. Ms. Hartwell, he began quietly, struggling to steady his voice. I was not informed that you would be attending personally. Evelyn held his gaze without hostility. That was intentional. The answer landed heavily across the ballroom. Diane Mercer stepped forward beside Evelyn with calm authority. Ms. Hartwell has attended this summit quietly for years, she explained to the room. Without public announcements. Without special treatment. Most people simply never recognized her. Murmurs spread softly through the crowd. Several executives exchanged embarrassed looks while others lowered their eyes completely. Suddenly, countless moments from previous years began replaying in their minds. The quiet woman occasionally seen speaking kindly to junior staff. The anonymous donor behind scholarship programs. The mysterious executive who requested certain startup founders receive second chances after failed pitches. It had been Evelyn all along. Victor Lang slowly turned toward the audience. 3 years ago, he said carefully, when my company nearly collapsed during the market downturn, Hartwell Capital quietly prevented 7,000 layoffs through emergency funding. He paused before looking directly at Evelyn with visible respect. She never allowed her name to be attached to it publicly. The room grew even quieter. Naomi Keller stood near the ballroom entrance with tears forming in her eyes as the truth continued unfolding piece by piece. Suddenly, the summit no longer felt like a glamorous networking event. It felt like a room full of people realizing they had completely misunderstood the most important person among them. Brandon swallowed hard. I never intended to disrespect you, he said weakly. Evelyn's expression remained calm, but there was now unmistakable sadness behind her eyes. Intentions matter, she replied softly. But the way we treat people before knowing their value matters even more. No one moved after that. The sentence seemed to settle into every corner of the ballroom. Then Tyler Boone unexpectedly stepped forward from near the back wall. His voice was nervous, but honest. Ms. Hartwell never argued with anyone downstairs, he said quietly. Even after everything. She thanked us for doing our jobs. Several people looked visibly uncomfortable hearing that. Brandon lowered his head slightly. The humiliation he had tried to force onto Evelyn was now wrapping tightly around him instead. But before the moment could turn cruel, Evelyn gently interrupted the silence. "No one will lose their career over tonight," she said calmly. Heads lifted across the ballroom in surprise. Even Brandon looked stunned. Evelyn glanced briefly toward Naomi and Tyler before continuing. "Fear causes people to follow bad judgment sometimes. That does not make them beyond grace." Diane Mercer studied Evelyn carefully, almost with admiration. The difference between power and dignity had never looked clearer than it did in that moment. Brandon finally spoke again, quieter than before. "Why come here anonymously at all?" Evelyn looked around the ballroom slowly, taking in the expensive suits, glowing stage lights, and polished image of modern corporate success surrounding her. "Because my father built this summit believing ideas mattered more than appearances," she answered softly. "Every year I come quietly to see whether that belief still survives here." No one had an answer for that. The room stood completely still beneath the golden lights while the weight of her words settled into every conversation, every judgment, every silent assumption made earlier that evening. And for the first time since Evelyn Hartwell entered the hotel, people were no longer looking at her like an outsider. They were looking at her with something far more powerful: respect. For several long moments after Evelyn Hartwell spoke about her father's belief in character over appearance, no one inside the ballroom seemed willing to interrupt the silence. The towering LED screens behind the stage continued glowing softly with the Titan Summit logo while hundreds of executives stood beneath the crystal chandeliers looking at Evelyn with an entirely different understanding than before. The same woman they had quietly dismissed an hour earlier had suddenly become the moral center of the room. Brandon Pierce remained near the stage holding the microphone loosely in one hand, though he no longer looked like the confident host who had controlled the evening. He looked like a man replaying every decision he had made and finally understanding the cost of arrogance. Diane Mercer stepped toward the center of the ballroom with calm authority. "Effective immediately," she announced. "All executive event access policies will be reviewed by the board before next year's summit." Her eyes briefly moved toward Brandon, though her voice remained professional rather than cruel. Leadership environments should never reward image over integrity. Several executives nodded immediately in agreement. What had happened tonight was no longer being viewed as a simple misunderstanding. It had become a reflection of the culture surrounding power itself. Then something unexpected happened. Evelyn gently stepped forward beside Diane. "There is one condition I would like added," she said calmly. The room focused on her instantly. "Beginning next year, 20% of summit invitations will be reserved for founders and entrepreneurs without corporate sponsorships or legacy connections." Soft murmurs spread across the ballroom. Evelyn continued quietly. "Some of the most important ideas in this country never enter rooms like this because the people carrying them cannot afford the appearance of success yet." Victor Lang smiled faintly from the front row. Several younger entrepreneurs near the back of the room looked stunned. Evelyn's voice never rose, but every word carried weight now. "My father built this summit to create opportunity, not social hierarchy." Diane Mercer nodded immediately. "Approved." The answer came without hesitation. Applause slowly began spreading through the ballroom, but this time it sounded genuine. Not polite networking applause. Respectful applause. Naomi Keller wiped at her eyes quietly, while Tyler Boone stood near the ballroom entrance looking overwhelmed by everything he had just witnessed. Earlier that evening, both of them had feared saying the wrong thing in front of power. Now they were watching real power use itself to protect dignity instead of demanding worship. Evelyn then turned toward Tyler. "Mr. Boone," she said softly. Tyler straightened immediately. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for treating me kindly when it would have been easier not to." Tyler looked genuinely emotional hearing that in front of the entire ballroom. Then Evelyn glanced toward Naomi. "And thank you for trying to speak up even when you were afraid." Naomi lowered her eyes with visible gratitude. Those simple acknowledgments somehow carried more impact than any dramatic speech could have. Brandon watched the entire exchange silently. No one mocked him. No one attacked him publicly. In many ways, that made the lesson even heavier. He slowly approached Evelyn at the edge of the stage while the ballroom remained hushed around them. I spent years believing professionalism meant protecting status, he admitted quietly. Tonight, I realized I was only protecting appearances. Evelyn studied him calmly. Many people confuse the two. Brandon swallowed hard before speaking again. I judged you before I knew anything about you. Evelyn gave a faint nod. No, she replied softly. You judged me because you thought you already knew everything that mattered. The words landed harder than any public humiliation ever could have. Brandon looked around the ballroom slowly then. The same executives he had tried so hard to impress were no longer admiring confidence or exclusivity. They were watching humility, restraint, and quiet strength with something much deeper than admiration. Respect. And standing there beneath the soft gold light of the chandeliers, Brandon Pierce finally understood the lesson that would stay with him long after the summit ended. The most powerful people in the room are often the ones who never need to announce it. By the time the final keynote session ended, the atmosphere inside the Monarch Grand Hotel no longer felt like the same event that had begun earlier that evening. The sharp edge of status and exclusivity had softened into something quieter, more human. Executives who once measured each other through titles and appearances now stood in small conversations reflecting on everything they had witnessed. Beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers, people no longer looked at Evelyn Hartwell with curiosity or intimidation. They looked at her with genuine respect. Near the ballroom windows overlooking the Chicago River, Evelyn stood alone for a moment, holding the silver watch her father had given her years ago. The city lights shimmered across the dark water below, while soft jazz drifted through the ballroom behind her. For the first time all evening, there was peace in her expression. Not triumph. Peace. The summit had changed tonight, but more importantly, the people inside it had changed too. Naomi Keller approached carefully, still holding her event tablet against her chest. Ms. Hartwell, she said softly, the board approved the new mentorship initiative immediately. They want you to announce it publicly next month. Evelyn smiled faintly. Good. Then maybe someone with a great idea will walk into this building next year without feeling invisible. Naomi hesitated before speaking again. Diane Mercer also asked me to lead the outreach program for first-generation founders. Her voice trembled slightly with disbelief. I never thought anyone noticed my work. Evelyn turned toward her warmly. The best people in organizations are usually the ones too busy working to demand attention. Naomi's eyes filled with emotion again, but this time it was gratitude rather than shame. Across the ballroom, Tyler Boone stood near the entrance speaking with one of the senior operations directors. Earlier that night, he had worried his honesty might cost him his job. Instead, he had just been offered a leadership role in executive guest relations after Diane Mercer personally praised the professionalism he showed downstairs. Tyler caught Evelyn's eye from across the room and gave a respectful nod she quietly returned. Then Brandon Pierce slowly approached her one final time. The confidence that once defined his posture had been replaced by something far more sincere. Humility. He no longer looked concerned with impressing the room around him. Ms. Hartwell, he said quietly, I owe you an apology that should have happened long before tonight. Evelyn listened calmly. Brandon lowered his eyes briefly before continuing. I built my career around appearances because I thought success depended on controlling how people were perceived. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing people as human beings first. His voice carried no excuses now, only honesty. What I did to you was wrong. Evelyn studied him for a moment beneath the soft ballroom lights. Then learn from it, she replied gently. That matters more than humiliation ever will. Brandon nodded slowly. I will. And for the first time that evening, Evelyn believed him. Nearby, several executives quietly began removing the velvet ropes that had separated elite guests from general attendees earlier in the night. It was a small change, almost symbolic, but people noticed it immediately. The barriers that once divided the room suddenly looked unnecessary. As the evening drew to a close, Evelyn walked once more through the ballroom her father helped create decades earlier. This time no one questioned whether she belonged there. People greeted her with warmth. Staff members smiled sincerely as she passed. Even the marble floors beneath her heels seemed quieter now, as though the building itself had finally exhaled after holding its breath all night. Before leaving, Evelyn paused near the entrance and looked back one final time at the summit continuing behind her. Her father's vision had survived after all, not because powerful people protected it, but because dignity still had the power to remind them who they were supposed to become. And that night, everyone remembered that true respect is never earned by status alone. It is earned by the humility to recognize the worth in someone before the world tells you who they are.